to the Danbury Library for hosting us. We're really excited to be here to present to you our talk today, which is titled Taking the Good from the Bad, Transforming Afflictions into Treatments. And we will be hearing from three fabulous speakers today.
I'm logged on.
Julie LeBeau, Daniele Parisi, and Arikta Srivasan. And you know, at the end of these three talks, we will be happy to take questions, but please save them for at the end of the third talk, where we will have a 15-minute Q&A period, which I will help moderate. So if you do have a question, please use the raise your hand function in Zoom or drop your questions in the chat and I can read them out. So thank you so much. You know, first a little bit about our speakers today. Our first speaker, Julie, is in the Department of Neurology at Yale, where she researches nerve pain. And a fun fact about her is that she is a spider whisperer since the 90s, which is a very enviable skill. Our second speaker, Dan, is in the Department of Immunobiology at Yale, where he researches drug repositioning. And a fun and very surprising fact about him is that he has never actually seen Star Wars. And our final speaker that we'll be hearing from today is Arikta, who is in the Department of Epidemiology, where she researches COVID-19 immunity. And a fun fact about her is that she speaks 6 languages, which is very impressive. All right, so I'd like to give you a brief overview of what we will be discussing today. And I'd like to start with a very general fact of life, which is this, that as we go through our lives, we are constantly faced with things that have the potential to harm us. So these may be things that originate inside our own bodies, such as cancer or various diseases, such as heart disease. We may be subjected to trauma and injury, such as if we get into a car accident and suffer a head injury, or if we are bitten by a venomous snake, for example. And sometimes the things that harm us are incredibly small, so small that they can't be seen with the naked eye. We may become infected with different viruses or bacteria, or we can contract illnesses carried by insects, such as malaria, which is carried by some mosquitoes. And many scientists research the things that harm us to better understand them. And then this allows them to use that knowledge to create treatments. So the topic that we are covering today deals with broadly the question of how do we turn the bad or the things that harm us into something good. However, this question is not so simple because rarely in biology is something inherently bad. It instead depends on the context or how you look at it. So we can take as an example the word bacteria, and this might conjure up images of food poisoning, such as when our lettuce gets contaminated and makes us sick. This is often perpetrated by a bacterium called E. coli, which you might have heard about in the news. However, bacteria also have some pretty great qualities. For example, did you know that bacteria are responsible for making our yogurts and cheeses? So kudos to them for that. In addition, many types of bacteria live naturally inside our bodies and are crucial to our health, often aiding in our digestive processes. And we would literally die if they weren't living inside us. So in this way, bacteria are good for us in some circumstances, but can make us sick in others. So just as context is important in determining whether something is good or bad for us, the amount of something can also dictate whether it has a positive or a negative effect. So we can take radiation as an example of this. So in high amounts, radiation can poison us and cause our death, which is what happened to the famous scientist Marie Curie after being consistently exposed to radiation during her research over many years. She died from radiation poisoning. However, radiation also has some very surprisingly good qualities. So X-rays use small doses of radiation to help doctors diagnose our injuries. So this X-ray on the left shows the lungs of someone with COVID-19. In addition, when used sparingly, radiation can also be a treatment to fight against cancer, which is pretty great. So therefore, with a change in perspective, scientists can take something dangerous like radiation and turn it into a helpful medical tool. So as such, with a little imagination, we can find the silver lining in a bad situation and even transform something bad into something good that works for us instead of against us. So today, our three speakers will each tell us a story about turning something negative into a positive. So hopefully this will be a very uplifting talk. So first, we'll hear from Julie, who will talk about how studying snake venom, of all things, may hold the key to finding a treatment for chronic pain. Next, Daniele will talk about how we can repurpose the unwanted side effects of drugs into treatments for other conditions. And finally, Aritha will tell us about how by using small parts of deadly germs, we can create life-saving vaccines that protect us from being infected in the first place. So with that, I'll hand things over to our first speaker, Julie.
Thank you so much. Well, again, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'll be talking to you about pain and toxinology, which is the study of what's inside poisons and venoms. And this little guy right there has actually a lot to do in both tales. To give you some context, I'd like you to imagine that you're taking a walk through the woods, somewhere tropical, maybe the Amazon in South America, when suddenly you feel something touch the side of your leg. You immediately stop to take a look, and then you realize that you were actually bitten by a snake, and not any kind of snake, a venomous one. So what exactly is the deal with them? Like, why are venoms the way they are? Where do they come from? And why do they hurt so bad, basically? So to start to understand that, it's important to realize that venoms have actually been around for much longer than we have, and they've been around for millions of years. And the reasons why they have survived through several generations of natural selection is because they actually have a very important purpose for venomous species. And the two main purposes that they have is to attack prey. And that's something that we often see in snakes and spiders, where they cause paralysis, where your body can no longer move. And that's very convenient for them in order to be able to swallow their prey whole, which you might have observed in the past. Additionally, they can use venoms to defend themselves against predators. And that's something that we often see in bees, wasps, or stonefish, and that causes them to be painful. I'm sure many of you have experienced stepping on a dead wasp or just enjoying a nice barbecue with your friends over the summer when a bee is just a little too curious come to sting you, and it hurts so much. And interestingly, in some species, we actually see two different kinds of venoms that can be interchangeably used to either attack prey or defend themselves against predators. So now going back to our story, and you just got bitten by a snake, what exactly is going on and what's happening to your body now? So the venom is contained in venom sacs behind the eyes of the snake. And as the venom goes down to the fangs and penetrates your skin, it actually goes through your bloodstream. And the venom is composed of what we call neurotoxins. They are toxic molecules that basically attack your nervous system and blocks the communication between nerves and muscles and other areas of your body. So what this does is that it will cause your muscles to jerk, it will cause your cells to burst, and paralysis, like we talked about. And in some cases, it can be painful. Also, in some other species, like in vipers, they actually cause their prey to bleed to death. So, all right, altogether, that sounds pretty bad. None of us would want this to happen, but can we actually try to think about how these negative things can be turned into something positive? Can we make these afflictions something good that would be helpful for us? Well, if we think about it a little bit, as I just mentioned, vipers cause their prey to bleed to death. So they are a procoagulant, which could be really good to fight blood clots, which are an issue in people suffering from hypertension and can be a cause to heart attacks or strokes. So maybe we can turn this around to actually be good for these patients. Another aspect that I mentioned is that it causes cells to burst. Maybe we can actually use that to selectively kill cells that we don't want, such as cancer cells. And finally, it blocks the communication between muscles and neurons. That would be great for anesthesia, and that can also be used for pain, where we need to block nerves to operate and to no longer feel pain. So actually, the idea of using venoms in medicine is almost as old as medicine itself. And that's something that we can see from the symbol of medicine, which is the rod of Asclepius, which is represented by a snake going around a stick. This might not be the symbol that you think of medicine, but that's the actual one. You can double check it online if you don't trust me. But so what is believed in Greek mythology is that Asclepius' followers, who was a god in those texts, the followers would use snakes and their venoms to treat patients from different type of illnesses and protect people. Additionally, in ancient Egypt, there is loads of reports of apitherapy, which consists in using the bee venom to treat anything from gout to baldness. And this has been shown also in ancient China and ancient Greece. And another example is an antidote called teriac, which was developed around the same time in this ancient civilization, but became very popular in the Middle Ages, where they used the skin and the flesh from vipers mixed with 60 other ingredients, and was originally developed to be a cure against poisons and venoms, and eventually kind of became this cure-it-all type of medicine. And today, venoms are actually going through a second wind in medicine as there is such great advances in technology. Now we can actually break down the venoms to figure out what each molecule does. And this has enabled us to develop new drug targets and fight diseases themselves, as well as develop insecticides and find treatment tools. So basically, using venoms, we can not only better understand how many illnesses work, but we can actually figure out what parts of them don't work so that we can develop treatments or use venom themselves as treatments. So circling back now to our story, as I mentioned earlier, I'm also here to talk about pain, and venoms do cause pain as well in different ways. So once again, you're there in the forest when, again, you feel something touch the side of your leg. Except that this time, you don't feel any pain. You probably think, oh, that's probably just a twig, that's probably just a leaf. I'm not feeling any pain, I'm not worried about this, I'll go on with my walk. Except that a few moments later, you collapse, having been bitten by a venomous snake. So here I want to highlight how pain is very important. While it is true that pain can really be a pain, it's actually really important. It's the signaling system in our brain that signals us of a threat or of a danger. In that particular instance, the fact that you did not feel any pain might lead you to die. Pain will result in you looking at your leg and seeking immediate medical assistance. So how does that work exactly? So here we take again our snake, and as its sharp fangs touches our leg, there are sensors in the skin that realize that there's an external stimulus that has the potential to be painful, and so they send this signal down pain cables all the way to pain superballs, which are located in your back in between each of your vertebrae. And then through these pain superballs, they'll go to the spinal cord and then eventually the brain, which will then decide whether or not there is danger and therefore initiate a pain response. But circling back to these pain superballs, inside of them are painful gates, which are the first control that any signal from the outside needs to go through in order to be going to the brain. And so if we take a closer look at this, you need to kind of think about these gates as being guarded by a very powerful magician, such as Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. So now imagine that you have your hand on a hot stove. It's hot, but it's not burning you. Then you have a very weak signal that is, so like all these signals, pain signals are electric. So you have a weak signal coming to the gates announcing that you've touched something warm. The signal is not strong enough to push Gandalf out of the way and therefore will not be communicated as being painful. However, as you increase the temperature of the stove and it becomes actually painful, the signal becomes stronger. And this time, Gandalf will have to move out of the way. The signal can go through and be transmitted to the brain. Importantly, those gates, when they don't work well, are caused to huge problems. So if they're in certain patients, these gates are either too sensitive or not sensitive enough. And when they're too sensitive, that's what we observe in patients with chronic pain, where Gandalf is very old, weak, and sick, and is therefore not strong enough to hold a much weaker signal. And therefore, in these patients, something that might be perceived in someone healthy as just warm now becomes painful. And so in patients, for instance, with a disease called erythromelalgia, and these are paintings done by these people, and you can find the name of the disease at the bottom of the screen, their hands and feet are they suffer from a burning pain sensation in their extremities. And this can be caused by heat itself. So if it's a really hot day, they have to plunge their hands and feet into ice cold water in order to tolerate the pain. And the opposite can be seen in people that have broken gates that this time causes that are completely closed, that are just not sensitive enough. And these people, because the gates are completely closed, no matter how strong the signal gets, they could be plunging their hands into lava, they will not feel a thing. So what this tells is that these gates are actually super important for pain and therefore would be a great target for drugs, whether it's for chronic pain or just as painkillers in itself, since clearly if I block these gates, I don't feel pain anymore at all. However, pain is actually important, like I mentioned, because you don't want to feel no pain, even though in an ideal world that might be great, you actually need it. So we want to be able to block this gate just a little bit by making Gandalf a lot stronger so that he can handle a bigger signal. And so the question is, can venom actually do that? So we know that venoms can cause pain, but can we actually use venoms to treat pain? Well, so one thing that is important also to know is that these gates are not just in those painful balls. They're actually in many different places in your body, including in your brain and in your heart. And so we want to make sure that when we develop drugs, we don't have them attack every gate in your body. Otherwise, that would be pretty bad if the gates in your heart no longer work, you can imagine. And so actually a recent study studying the venom of Chinese Naja cobra was able to block the painful gates alone, which would then bring us full circle on using the venom of snakes to treat the pain that maybe some venoms can cause us. So how does that work exactly? How do we go from the venom of a snake to a bottle? So the first part is milking. We actually call milking the process of extracting the venoms from snakes or any other venomous species. And here it consists by massaging the head of the snake until venom comes out of its fangs. And in the case, for instance, of scorpion, by basically applying some light pressure on its tail, we manage to get the milk out, kind of like we would on a cow. So now that we've got the milk, now we've got the venoms, what do we do with it? So there's two main approaches. One is to actually have this big library of all the venoms from a bunch of different species that you've looked at in the past and actually try to figure out which ones would hit the target that we're interested in. And here is our gates. Or we could have a venom from an animal that we've never screened before. And then we can ask the question, what is that venom composed of? And a venom is a cocktail of different molecules of these different toxins. And so what we want is to figure out what each molecule does. So the first step to do that is to actually break it down. We go from the whole venom to each individual molecule. And once we have each individual molecule, we test which ones actually exert the effect that we want. So we test each of these molecules until we find one that blocks the gates the way we want it. And here we found one, success, and we continue until we found a bunch that do the same thing. Once we have a bunch of molecules that actually hit our targets, we keep the good ones that are having the positive effect, which here would be to prevent the signal to block some of the signal and just leave the regular one out. And we throw away all the bad ones. And so once we keep the good molecules that do what we want them to do, we can develop them into drugs and then test them out on people and make sure that they actually hit where we want in people and not kind of everywhere, otherwise we will get side effects. So importantly as well is that venoms are not just good for pain, they're good for a lot of other things. For instance, scorpion venoms have been shown to fight autoimmune disease and reduce inflammation, which is great for different forms of infections, as well as allergies and many other things. While sea anemones have actually this property of bursting cells, which can be very helpful to kill cancer cells. And there's a lot of research being done right now to do that. Vipers, like I mentioned, cause their prey to bleed to death and have actually led to the development of an FDA-approved drug called captopril, which is really good to reduce hypertension. And finally, platypus, which I don't even know if you knew was a venomous species, has been great to combat type 2 diabetes. So it's interesting to kind of think whether we could actually use snakes that can be a problem and other venomous animals to actually be the cure to whether it is the venom itself that is the pain it's causing us, or other illnesses. And maybe next time that you'll be hospitalized for something, maybe the drug that you'll be given actually is derived from a venomous animal. And with that, I'll pass it to Dan.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank Julie for the amazing talk. So now I'm gonna switch to the next topic, which is deeply connected with what Julie said a few moments ago, and is drug repurposing or drug repositioning. So I want to start with a quote that builds a bridge between the venoms, the poison, and drugs. There is this guy, this physician from Switzerland in the 16 to the 17th century, 15th to the 16th centuries, who studied a lot the effect of substances on the human body. And he said that there is no such thing like poison, because every substance can be a poison or could have healing effect depending on the context and the dosage of the substance. So now in modern medicine, we refer to those substances as drugs. So what is a drug? Drug is any substance that has a biological effect on the human body and can alterate and change the physiology of how your body works. So a medicine is a drug, but not only that. There are substances that are considered recreational drugs, and there are also everyday food and drinks that are actually drugs. So you might not know that the most used drug all over the world is the coffee and the caffeine that is contained inside this drink. But not only that, also tobacco, and the nicotine in the tobacco is a drug, and so on. So how do drugs work? Let's focus on a specific drug. I said coffee is the most common substance known as a drug used worldwide. So when we assume the caffeine inside a cup of coffee, we are actually ingesting this molecule, the caffeine, and this is the active agent, the drug that is giving the effect. So the drug, in order to work, it has to find a target in our body. So in the case of caffeine, the target is in our brain, and the effect is the euphoria or the hyperactivity. That is, the hyperactivity that is as an effect of ingesting the drink. But once we get that coffee, the caffeine doesn't not only goes to the brain, it actually goes to many other targets in our body, such as the gut or the stomach or the heart. And the interaction between the molecule and those other targets in our body leads to undesired effects. And in case of coffee, if we get too much coffee, or we happen to be sensitive to caffeine, we can have anxiety, stomachache, nausea, tiredness, and this is the feeling those feelings we got it exactly from the interaction between the drug and alternative targets in our body. So this is beyond the side effects coming from the usage of a specific drug. But can we take something good from those side effects? Can we use the side effects to actually make a new usage for a drug? So this is called drug repurposing, and I want to show you some cases that are actually successful coming from repositioning a specific drug to a different target. So in the late 90s, a British pharma company decided to take into the clinics for clinical trials a molecule called sildenafil in order to treat heart problems. So they thought the target might have been in the heart, and using this molecule, we could have cured heart failures. Well, that was not exactly what happened. So once the molecule was tested on the patient, they realized that the molecule was actually working on a different target, which was not the heart, but a bit down, a little bit more down there than the heart. And the doctors realized that every patient, assuming sildenafil, were experiencing marked penile erection. So, well, what could they do with this side effect? Well, they were smart and they realized that instead of trashing the drug, they could have used this molecule to cure a different condition, a different disease. So that's how sildenafil became Viagra, and Viagra is now the leading drug for treating erectile dysfunction. Um, so this is how drug repurposing works. We start from a first therapeutic indication, and as a therapeutic indication is I refer to a condition that the patient that leads the patient to make use of a specific drug that is advisable to treat that condition. From the assumption of one drug, we can have multiple side effects, but one of those side effects could be successfully used to treat a new disease. And so we could make a different indication for this drug that could lead to a different drug on the market. But why would we use drug repurposing to discover a new drug? Well, the answer is in front of your eyes. Drug discovery is a very time-consuming and risky process that involves a lot of people, requires a very huge investment that can get to 2 billion US dollars, almost 20 years of tests, both in the laboratory and in the clinics. And not talking about all the expertise that are needed in order to get a drug successfully to the market. Well, using drug repurposing and looking at the side effect of known drugs before trying to explore the unknown pool of molecules to get the new drug will have the time and the money that are needed to get a new drug to the market. And that will be a very great beneficial, will give a very great beneficial to both the patient and the pharma companies that are trying to invest their money on the drug. Well, let's go on with another example, which is a little bit more tricky than the sildenafil one. We're talking now about a very powerful drug that was extremely bad. A drug that horrified Europe, the post-war Europe in the late 50s and early 60s. So we're talking about thalidomide. Thalidomide was welcome as a wonder drug. So thalidomide helped a continent find its sleep after the Second World War, and it was used as hypnotic and sedative to fight the problem of sleep, and also it was indicated for pregnant women to fight the morning sickness. It looked extremely safe in the beginning until a couple of years after entering to the market, the doctors had to witness a pool of very, very horrifying side effects. So this drug was causing development of the deformities and causing malformations in newborns when the mother was exposed to this molecule. So it was immediately withdrawn from the market, and all the public opinion in Europe was extremely shocked. Well, now is actually shocking thinking that this drug came back, left from the door and came back from the window. Because starting from the first indication, which was morning sickness and insomnia, and looking at the side effects, some very smart doctors and physicians and scientists understood that there was a potential in this powerful drug, and the same biological effect that was behind the unwanted effect of the drug was actually can actually be used successfully to stop the growth of some kind of cancer like the multiple myeloma, for which we have a little pool of efficient drug at the moment. So this can lead to another philosophical question. Is any drug potentially repurposable? Can we use any kind of bad drug for a specific therapeutic indication? Well, let's look, for example, at the substance of abuse and recreational drugs. Well, we cannot avoid thinking about the marijuana, for example. Marijuana is one of the most used common recreational drugs, but it's also a molecule that has been used for years to treat different medical conditions. At the moment, there are almost 300 patents only in US that use the active drug contained in the marijuana to treat different conditions, such as anxiety or also pain. Well, marijuana has a very mild plethora of side effects, but we have also different drugs that could be interesting as well, but they carry a lot of stigma and also strong side effect that we are not sure we can afford to see in the patient. So after the 70s, with the hippie movement, the American government decided to categorize substances and make a chart in order to stop the usage, even for medical purposes, of a specific category of drugs that could be they could lead to abuse. So one of those drugs is, for example, the LSD. How does LSD work? LSD is the father of all the psychedelic drug, is a synthetic acid that once in the human body, it goes to the brain where it finds its target. And the effect of the interaction between the molecule and the target is the hallucinogenic effect. Hallucinogenic effect is made by the opening of a lot of gates, as Julie said before, in our brain. They make us experiencing in a very peculiar way the stimuli that we receive from the external environment, such as smells, tastes, colors, and shapes. Well, those hallucinogenic effects are behind the reason why a lot of people use the LSD for recreational use, but it's also behind a specific effect that the doctors have seen in people using this drug. So apparently, in case of terminal patients that are going through the last phases of diseases and they are expecting death in a specific time, using the LSD can help to to see again colors and find joy in an ordinary life that it might be now dark and meaningless. So LSD is actually now in the clinics and is successfully going through the second phase of clinical trial, and might be a powerful drug to treat specific conditions. At the end of my presentation, I wanted to show you how people at the moment, how scientists and doctors are doing drug repurposing. So there are many different ways, but one specific way is called rational-based drug repurposing. The rational-based drug repurposing use the big amount of data that we have stored in our databases on drugs and their targets, and we try to make connection, use machine learning. I guess you already heard this from the previous talk in this series, in order to suggest an old drug for a new therapeutic indication, and so making drug repurposing in a very rational way. So this is something that I personally studied during my PhD, and what we tried to do was to match a drug with different targets in the human body, exactly like Tinder tried to match a person, two different users in the app. So we can decide that the drug, based on their characteristics, it could be more suitable to treat a target in our heart instead of the brain, and so we can assess that there is a connection between those two entities, and we can repurpose successfully and in a very cheap and fast way, a drug to a new target. Now, at the end of my presentation, I wanted to quote another very important personality in the pharmacological world, who is Sir James Black. He's the father of the beta blockers, and during his Nobel speech, he said that the best way to discover a drug is actually to start from an old one, and it might be a bad drug that then turns to a new, good, better one thanks to drug repurposing. And now I want to conclude by giving the word to our next speaker, Arikta, who is going to show us how we can actually take something extremely bad, who's like the pathogen who's causing the disease, in order to make something good using the vaccine.
Thank you, Julie and Dan, for putting up such a tough act to follow. Now, you know how now we've learned how something bad, such as a venom, can be used to help us, and how we can use harmful side effects of drugs in such a way that it's useful for us. Next up, we're going to talk about infectious germs or pathogens and how we can use a part of them to fight the very thing that's causing us those infections. Various kinds of pathogens or germs, such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi, infect us through various routes, like from infected food or water, aerosols, and sometimes even infected syringes. Each of these germs manifest in us in a different way to make us sick with different symptoms. For instance, some of these pathogens give us a fever, while others may give us diarrhea. Although small numbers of pathogens enter our body at one time, these pathogens have the ability to multiply inside of us. And when they multiply and become higher in numbers, this increased number is what causes us to get sick. In order to help us from getting sick, our body's immune system is designed so that these germs can be prevented from multiplying and growing in number in our body. So when these germs enter us, our immune system acts against them and attacks them, with the cells acting like soldiers. Now, if our body is going to war, it better be with really good weapons, right? Turns out our weapons are great. The cells of our immune system produce molecules called antibodies that act like weapons in this war. These weapons help prevent germs from causing infections. Once the immune system fights off a particular pathogen, it remembers exactly what that pathogen looks like for future reference. It helps ensure that if the same pathogen infects us again in the future, it's fought off more easily by our immune system. This can be thought of as cells acting like patrol officers looking for the wanted enemy. To sum that up, cells, these brown, wacky looking things here, get infected by pathogens, shown by these red circles. And these wise old cells remember and recognize the pathogen and train nearby soldier cells exactly how to beat it. Then the antibodies or the weapons are deployed to beat the pathogen. And finally, the pathogen is killed and our immune system wins. Does this mean that our immune system has to be less effective the first time a pathogen attacks us? The answer to that is a very clear no. Turns out we don't have to get infected for our immune system to make a memory response. Let's take a quick detour. Where's Wally? I hope you've heard of it. Is like this British series of children's puzzle books that was released in the US as Where's Waldo? Because we're in North America, I'll just call it Where's Waldo. The objective of these puzzles was to look for Waldo in these complex illustrations with a lot of people doing like a lot of random activities at any given location. So now if you're a kid looking for Waldo in this, how do you go about it? If you were a computer, you could probably do some extremely complicated calculations to figure out where exactly in the image Waldo should be. Now, this is not something I totally understand. But normally you would first ask what Waldo looks like and take a long, hard look at Waldo and like try to remember any defining characteristics. Then you might decide that Waldo's characteristic red and white striped t-shirt, his round black glasses, or his cane are, I mean, you might decide that they look very specific and that you'd rather look for any of these defining characteristics instead of just like looking for all of Waldo at once. And you have this image. This is a fairly simple illustration because Waldo is smack bang in the middle of the illustration. But then you look around and you see which one of these figures have that striped red t-shirt. And now you know that this is the only person with a striped red t-shirt. So you decide that this is you decide that this is Waldo. But turns out this is also what vaccines do. So this is a virus, like a cartoon of a virus, and which is a type of pathogen. It has some characteristic features like these tiny orange circles or these red bulb-like bumps, which correspond to, say, a Waldo's t-shirt or glasses. So now we'd want the immune system to be trained to look for these particular features. And so whenever the immune system sees any of these features in us, then it knows that this feature belongs to a pathogen which wants to infect us. And either these molecules themselves or the genetic material that codes for them is incorporated into vaccines, and hence we're basically taking a part of the very thing that makes us sick in the first place to train our immune system to beat it, which is pretty cool. How then do vaccines work? I mean, we just talked about it, and I'll just summarize it a little. So this either a weakened or a killed form or a part of the disease-causing organism is injected into our body. The body then creates antibodies to fight against those germs. And if the actual germs are ever attacking the body now knows how to recognize those germs. And this is how they help you. Do they help others as well? Turns out when higher percentages of the population is vaccinated, the overall spread of the infection is not only reduced, but the overall number of people who get infected are not only reduced, but also the spread of the infection is much slower when more people are vaccinated. In these images, the light gray people are healthy. These light green people are those who are immune because they have already gotten the disease. That is, they created a memory response because their immune system had already seen the pathogen. And these dark gray people are those who are vaccinated. So their immune system has memory because it saw a part of the pathogen earlier. And the red thing that is spreading is the people who are infected. So in this first illustration, where only 5% of all these light gray squares are now dark gray because only 5% are vaccinated, versus this, where more people are vaccinated, and this almost everyone is vaccinated. And this is what we mean by herd immunity. That is a term that we have been throwing around a lot during the current pandemic. So that's pretty cool, right? Then why would people not want to get vaccinated? It helps you, it helps the community at large. So why? Turns out vaccine hesitancy is almost as old as vaccines themselves are. As Julie and Dan alluded to in their talks, this idea of taking the good from the bad is pretty old. The first vaccine was discovered in the early 1800s, or the late 1790s, and it was against smallpox. The closely related cowpox virus was used to make this smallpox vaccine. This image on the screen was published in the 1850s by the Anti-Vaccine Society, soon after the first vaccine was produced, due to rampant misinformation. In the image, people develop cow-like appendages soon after they get vaccinated. which obviously was not true. Nobody's nose was turning into a mini cow. And ironically, smallpox is the only infectious disease to be eradicated till date. And that is in large part thanks to the vaccine that was produced very early. So imagine going out to an extremely crowded place on a rainy day with no umbrella. If everyone else around you is holding up an umbrella, you might not even realize it's raining. You look around you, all you see is people holding umbrellas, but you don't feel the rain. So it feels kind of stupid that people's hands are hurting and holding up an umbrella. But the only reason you're protected is that everyone else is holding up an umbrella, right? Similarly, getting vaccine is not just important for your own health, but also for the health and well-being of others around you. In the end, just like the saying, it's stay safe, use a mask, and get vaccinated. These are the groups of individuals who are eligible to get vaccinated in Connecticut right now. And the website that you see on the bottom right has a lot of great information about vaccination. So do check it out. And in summary, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, and maybe we can all find something bad and repurpose it into something good, as was done with the venoms Julie talked about, the drugs with bad side effects that Dan talked about, and infectious disease causing pathogens too.